Hello, welcome back, grade 11. Today we're gonna go back to our North Star Unit 1, and this time we're gonna talk about genius. Is that nature or nurture? Okay, that is the topic for the reading and writing. Number 1, why are some people geniuses and others are not? Does the environment a person is raised in, nurture, create a genius, or is it because the person was simply born that way? And with that, we refer to nature. Which part do you think each of these plays in being a genius? Number 2, what is one special talent or ability that you have? Now, come on, think about that. What is it you have as a talent? When did you first become aware of that? Did it come naturally, or did you have to practice a long time to perfect it? Like take lessons, courses, and so on. You may instead answer these questions about someone you know who has a talent or an ability. Okay, this is just a little bit of a reflection on building the background on the topic genius, nature, or nurture. Okay, we continue with reading 1, A Genius Explains. So the first thing we're going to do is the vocabulary. You see the bold-faced words in the text. Yeah, we have interaction, flexible, compensate, disabled, 7, estimate, retain, benefits, predictable, anxious, image, and some. Read the short piece about Daniel Temer, who is considered by many to be a genius. Being a genius does not mean that all aspects of your life are easy or even that you are good at everything. Daniel is very good at some things, but challenged by others. Pay attention to the bold-faced words. Try to understand them from the context. You can pause the video right now to read the text. Go ahead. Awesome. Now, looking at number 2, complete the sentences with the words in the boxes. We've got compensate, estimate, and retain. And these are all the words that are bold-faced in your text. Try to complete the sentence and pick which word is the correct word to complete the sentence so it makes sense. If you have a problem with the meaning of the word, you can just look it up in English, or if it is needed, even in Bahasa Indonesia. Pause your video to answer number 1 to 3. Okay, now we continue with the next box, which has the words anxious, disabled, flexible, and predictable. Pause your video to answer number 5 to 7. And last, we've got 5 more words in the box. We've got benefit, image, interaction, 7, and some. You can pause the video to answer number 8 until 12. Cool. Okay, if it comes to checking the activities that you have done, we will do that together in our Zoom meeting. Okay, that's where we will discuss the answers, the results, and you can ask me questions. So if there's anything you don't understand yet or you're confused about, please write down the questions so you remember to ask it. Okay, previewing. You're going to read an article about Daniel Tammet, an autistic 7. Before you read, look at the statements below. Check 3 things about Daniel that you think you will read in the story. Now we get back to the idea of previewing. In the last video for listening, I explained to you what previewing is, and you've learned this also last year. Previewing is when you are predicting. So you do that for listening, you also do that for a text. Now, for a text means that you preview is that you predict the text type. We have different types of texts, okay? There are articles, journals, letters, essays, blogs, summaries, interviews, speeches, a lot of different types of texts. By looking at the text, you can already predict what type it is. And if you know the type of text, you can predict the purpose that the text has. Okay? Now, by knowing the topic and the purpose, you basically already know what you are going to read or what you are reading for. Then while you're reading, you will record and understand more facts about the text. If you don't do that and you go straight into the text, probably halfway through you will not know or have forgotten what you're reading about and you would have to repeat it. Okay, so previewing is a very important reading skill that has to be applied. Now, in this case, if you look at the text, you see the title, Genius Explains. It's a whole lot of text, so it's probably an article and it's probably informative. Okay, now here are 6 numbers. Please look at these statements and check the 3 things that you think that will be discussed in this story. Pause your video to tick. Go ahead. Okay, I wonder what the 3 things are that you ticked out. Okay, so we're going to listen. I'm going to turn on the audio and you're going to read along. Why do I turn on the audio? It is good for you to hear the pronunciation, yeah, and also the intonation of the speaker. Let's listen.
A Genius Explains by Richard Johnson, The Guardian. Daniel Tammet is talking. As he talks, he studies my shirt and counts the stitches. Ever since the age of 3, when he suffered an epileptic fit, Tammet has been obsessed with counting. Now he is 26 and a mathematical genius who can figure out cube roots quicker than a calculator and recall pi to 22,514 decimal places. He also happens to be autistic, which is why he can't drive a car, wire a plug, or tell right from left. He lives with extraordinary ability and disability. Tammet is calculating 377 multiplied by 795. Actually, he isn't calculating. There is nothing conscious about what he is doing. He arrives at the answer instantly. Since his epileptic fit, he has been able to see numbers as shapes, colors, and textures. The number 2, for instance, is a motion, and 5 is a clap of thunder. When I multiply numbers together, I see 2 shapes. The image starts to change and evolve, and a 3rd shape emerges. That's the answer. It's mental imagery. It's like maths without having to think. Tammet is a savant, an individual with an astonishing, extraordinary mental ability. An estimated 10% of the autistic population and an estimated 1% of the non-autistic population have savant abilities, but no one knows exactly why. Scans of the brains of autistic savants suggest that the right hemisphere might be compensating for damage in the left hemisphere. While many savants struggle with language and comprehension, skills associated primarily with the left hemisphere, they often have amazing skills in mathematics and memory, primarily right hemisphere skills. Typically, savants have a limited vocabulary, but there is nothing limited about Tammet's vocabulary. Tammet is creating his own language, strongly influenced by the vowel and image-rich languages of Northern Europe. He already speaks French, German, Spanish, Lithuanian, Icelandic, and Esperanto. The vocabulary of his language, Monti, meaning a type of tree, reflects the relationships between different things. The word ima, for instance, translates as mother, and ila is what a mother creates, life. Paika is sun, and paiva is what the sun creates, day. Tammet hopes to launch Monti in academic circles later this year. his own personal exploration of the power of words and their interrelationship. Last year, Tammet broke the European record for recalling pi, the mathematical constant, to the furthest decimal point. He found it easy, he says, because he didn't even have to think. To him, pi isn't an abstract set of digits. It's a visual story, a film projected in front of his eyes. He learnt the number forwards and backwards, and last year spent 5 hours recalling it in front of an adjudicator. He wanted to prove a point. I memorized pi to 22,514 decimal places, and I am technically disabled. I just wanted to show people that disability needn't get in the way. Tammet is softly spoken and shy about making eye contact, which makes him seem younger than he is. He lives on the Kent coast, but never goes near the beach. There are too many pebbles to count. The thought of a mathematical problem with no solution makes him feel uncomfortable. Trips to the supermarket are always a chore. There's too much mental stimulus. I have to look at every shape and texture, every price, and every arrangement of fruit and vegetables. So instead of thinking, what cheese do I want this week, I'm just really uncomfortable. Tammet has never been able to work 9 to 5. It would be too difficult to fit around his daily routine. For instance, he has to drink his cups of tea at exactly the same time every day. Things have to happen in the same order. He always brushes his teeth before he has his shower. I have tried to be more flexible, but I always end up feeling more uncomfortable. Retaining a sense of control is really important. I like to do things in my own time and in my own style, so an office with targets and bureaucracy just wouldn't work. Instead, he has set up a business on his own, at home, writing email courses in language learning, numeracy, and literacy for private clients. It has had the fringe benefit of keeping human interaction to a minimum. It also gives him time to work on the verb structures of Manti. Few people on the streets have recognized Tammet since his pi record attempt. But when a documentary about his life is broadcast on Channel 5 later this year, all that will change. The highlight of filming was to meet Kim Peek, the real-life character who inspired the film Rain Man. Before I watched Rain Man, I was frightened. As a 9-year-old schoolboy, you don't want people to point at the screen and say, "That's you." But I watched it and felt a real connection. Getting to meet the real-life Rain Man was inspirational. Peek was shy and introspective, but he sat and held Tammet's hand for hours. We shared so much, our love of key dates from history, for instance, and our love of books. As a child, I regularly took over a room in the house and started my own lending library. I would separate out fiction and nonfiction, and then alphabetize them all. I even introduced a ticketing system. I love books so much. I've read more books than anyone else I know, so I was delighted when Kim wanted to meet in a library. Peek can read 2 pages simultaneously, one with each eye. He can also recall in exact detail the 7,600 books he has read. When he is at home in Utah, he spends afternoons at the Salt Lake City Public Library, memorizing phone books and address directories. He is such a lovely man, says Tammet. Kim says you don't have to be handicapped to be different. Everybody's different. And he's right. As a baby, he, Tammet, banged his head against the wall and cried constantly. Nobody knew what was wrong. His mother was anxious and would swing him to sleep in a blanket. She breastfed him for 2 years. The only thing the doctors could say was that perhaps he was understimulated. Then, one afternoon when he was playing with his brother in the living room, he had an epileptic fit. I was given medication, round blue tablets to control my seizures, and told not to go out in direct sunlight. I had to visit the hospital every month for regular blood tests. I hated those tests, but I knew they were necessary. To make up for it, my father would always buy me a cup of squash to drink while we sat in the waiting room. It was a worrying time because my dad's father had epilepsy and actually died of it in the end. They were thinking, this is the end of Daniel's life. He remembers being given a ladybird book called Counting when he was 4. When I looked at the numbers, I saw images. It felt like a place I could go where I really belonged. That was great. I went to this other country whenever I could. I would sit on the floor in my bedroom and just count. I didn't notice that time was passing. It was only when my mum shouted up for dinner or someone knocked at my door that I would snap out of it. One day, his brother asked him a sum. He asked me to multiply something in my head, like what is 82 times 82 times 82 times 82? I just looked at the floor and closed my eyes. My back went very straight, and I made my hands into fists. But after 5 or 10 seconds, the answer just flowed out of my mouth. He asked me several others, and I got every one right. My parents didn't seem surprised, and they never put pressure on me to perform for the neighbors. They knew I was different, but wanted me to have a normal life as far as possible. Tammet could see the car park of his infant school from his bedroom window, which made him feel safe. I loved assembly because we got to sing hymns. The notes formed a pattern in my head, just like the numbers did. The other children didn't know what to make of him and would tease him. The minute the bell went for playtime, he would rush off. I went to the playground, but not to play. The place was surrounded by trees. While the other children were playing football, I would just stand and count the leaves. Tammet may have been teased at school, but his teachers were always protective. I think my parents must have had a word with them, so I was pretty much left alone. He found it hard to socialize with anyone outside the family, and with the advent of adolescence, his shyness got worse. After leaving school with 3 A-levels, history, French, and German, all grade Bs, he decided he wanted to teach, only not the predictable learn-by-rote type of teaching. For a start, he went to teach in Lithuania, and he worked as a volunteer. It was also the first time I was introduced as Daniel, rather than the guy who can do weird stuff in his head. It was such a pleasant relief. Later, he returned home to live with his parents and found work as a maths tutor. When he isn't working, Tammet likes to hang out with his friends on the church quiz team. His knowledge of popular culture lets him down, but he's a shoo-in when it comes to the maths questions. I do love numbers, he says. It isn't only an intellectual or aloof thing that I do. I really feel that there is an emotional attachment, a caring for numbers. I think this is a human thing. In the same way that a poet humanizes a river or a tree through metaphor, my world gives me a sense of numbers as personal. It sounds silly, but numbers are my friends.
Yes. Okay. That was a very long text, yeah? Yeah, you will have more longer texts now here and then throughout this book. And it's good because you're learning how to deal with longer text is very important. Main ideas. We've come to that point. Number 1, look again at your predictions from the preview on page 6. So you chose 3 predictions, and now I want to ask you, how did those 3 predictions that you ticked help you to understand the article? Was it similar or not? Were you thinking in the same line with the text? Yes or no? Okay, so previewing definitely is important for our focus, especially if the text is so long. Number 2, many articles and textbooks contain paragraph headers. Yeah, those are headings, yes? A paragraph header is like a title for the paragraph. It's like a smaller title. So it's where you have the title, and then the headings are like the subtitles. It tells readers what they can expect to read about. Choose the best paragraph header for each of the following sections in the paragraph. So you're going to pick which one is suitable, meaning that you need to understand what the paragraph is about. Main title, headings, those are the subtitles, the smaller titles, and they go maybe for one or two paragraphs. Means that that's like a tinier topic that covers that paragraph. Now, let's try number one. For paragraphs 1 and 2, is it A, is it B, or is it C? Now, you would have to go back to paragraph 1 and 2. Then you would have to scan. Last year you learned what scanning is. Still remember? Scanning is when you're going over the text. You're just looking over the text without reading it. And when you're scanning, when you're going over the text, you're basically looking at particular keywords. Now, how do you know the keyword? You have already annotated it. Now, for instance, here in number 1, we can annotate, we can look at it. We see Daniel Tammet, mathematical genius, abilities, disabilities, or how he does it. You could underline those words, and then when you go back to the text, you can start scanning to figure out, because this one is for paragraph 1 and 2, you scan through it to see what this is about. Does that fit either A, either B, or either C? What do you think? Yeah, correct. That's B. Daniel Tammet's abilities and disabilities. That would be the perfect heading for paragraph 1 and 2, because that's what those two paragraphs are about. Okay, now you're going to do number 2 until 6. You can pause your video. Okay, great. As I stated before, the results of your activities will be discussed together during our Zoom meeting. We're going to continue with details. Remember, details are specific facts. In a text, details are the components that explain and develop a main point. Main points develop the main idea. Now, let's look at this. Reading 1 gives information about Daniel's abilities and disabilities. Read the categories on the left in the chart below, and then write the details and examples from the box next to the appropriate category. Finally, identify each detail or example as either an ability or a disability. Share your completed charts. Now, so what are the two things that you should do? You can look through, look at the chart here. You see here at the left side here, Daniel feels uncomfortable in the supermarket. Daniel has invented his own language. No. Daniel can calculate cube roots faster than a calculator. No. So what are the ones that are correct? So read the categories at the left in the chart, yeah, and then you will write down the details. Yes. Yeah. And then finally, identify whether the detail or example is an ability or disability. So you can look at this, and then you will write the details here about math, and then you can write down whether that is an ability or a disability. Yes. Okay, you can pause your video to try this. Okay, great. Now we continue to the next part, which is making inferences. We talked about this already in the listening 1 video, and just to remind you, making inferences is an educated guess about something that is not directly stated, so it is implied. We do this to understand underlying meaning. It is a way to analyze and critically read a text. In A Genius Explains, there are quotes from Daniel Tammet and Kim Peek that show what others might assume about the two men's disability. What assumptions can you infer from these quotations? Well, let's look at the example. Daniel I just wanted to show people that disability needn't get in the way. Now, people think that someone with a disability cannot do as much as someone without a disability. Yeah. If you look at this example here, what assumption can you get out of it? When other people realized that Daniel had a disability, they assumed that he would have problems in the other areas of his life. That was their assumption, but it was not necessarily the case. By showing people that he could achieve remarkable things, like in mathematics, even though he was technically disabled, he wanted to show that their assumptions were wrong. His disability was not going to hold him back. So this case, there were certain areas that he had a disability in, but there were other areas that he was very strong at doing. So when we look at the example, I just wanted to show people that disability need not get in the way, because so many people easily assume. That's why he made that statement. Yes. Assumptions are when you assume, when you think something to be in a certain way, but it is not necessarily so. That's an assumption. If that word is still difficult for you, then you can just look it up or look it up in Bahasa Indonesia to figure out what it is. Now, here you see statements 1 until 5. Read the following quotes. These are quotes, so these are sentences or phrases that are directly stated by Daniel and Kim. Now, what assumptions do the quotes show that people have made about them? And then you can complete the sentence. I want to do number 1 as an example. Daniel, paragraph 18. It was also the first time I was introduced as Daniel rather than the guy who can do weird stuff in his head. Okay, that definitely shows an assumption. The guy who can do weird stuff in his head. Others didn't think that Daniel was a normal person. They looked at him as some sort of weird person. Yeah. So basically, the assumption we can take from the guy who can do weird stuff in his head, from this we can see that people assume Daniel to be a weirdo, but he actually is not. He's just very smart and different. Now, I'd like you to look at number 2, number 3, 4, and 5, and try to see which part in the sentence can create an assumption and complete the sentence. Okay, you can pause your video now. Great. So assumptions are things that we think of something or someone that is not stated, but that by looking at the circumstance or the context, we just assume to be so. We just think it is so. But our assumptions are not necessarily true. They can be very subjective. Okay, last but not least, we go to the last part of reading 1, which is expressing opinions. Very important for you guys to express your opinion, stating what your viewpoint is of something, and explaining and developing that by giving reasons. Now, you can choose one of the questions, either 1 or 2, and then I'd like you to give your opinion about it. Write it down, just there in your book, that's fine, and give some reasons why you have that opinion. Number 1, which of Daniel's abilities would be most useful to you? And how would having this ability change your life? Well, being very good at math like he is, that's kind of amazing, right? For school, I think. Number 2, William James, the American psychologist and philosopher, 1842 up till 1910, said, "Genius means nothing more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way." How does this quotation apply to Daniel Tammet? Now, you don't need to respond to both. You can just pick either one or two. Pause your video to write down your opinion and give reasons for that opinion. Okay, great. That brings us to the end of our lesson. We went through some of the vocab, which is related also to the text that we read. After that, we went over previewing, important to predict the type of text and the purpose that text holds to give us focus, and so we know what to listen for or read for. And then we discussed main ideas. Knowing the difference between a main idea, which is only stated in one sentence, covers the whole text, then the main point is tinier, also needs development, and then a main point that is developed by a detail. And details are facts that are very specific. Then we talked about making inferences to understand assumptions. So sometimes in a text we can find an assumption that is made by the writer or which we can see in the text, but is not literally stated, but we can find that by looking at the underlying meaning. And last, we expressed our opinion. So this is it for today's lesson, and we will be back soon for reading 2. Have a great day. God bless. Bye.